Well, I'm pretty excited for tonight, everybody. We've got a little bit of a change of pace here from The Chosen. I personally think that the Chosen series sets a pretty high bar as far as cinematic representation of scripture. They've they successfully hooked me in, and very excited about season five. But until then, we do have the pleasure of taking a look at another crack at cinematic scripture, a cinematic portrayal of scripture. And I'm so interested to try to figure out what are some similarities, what are differences. We're going to want to retie our brains into that idea that there might be different shades of truth as far as like what the scripture says, what history tells us. In the case of this particular movie, we're going to want to maybe have some understanding that there are ancient writings that are not biblical, that we might call them apocryphal, we might call them extra gospels or whatever, through the course of the centuries. They have been kicked out of canon, so we do have a gospel according to Mary, for example. We do have a gospel according to James, which is partially a source text for this movie that we're going to be watching over the next 3 weeks. And so I think it'll be interesting to figure out like what, where are they drawing from, and what are we taking away from the screen as a positive learning experience, and what could be a distraction? I don't know. So I'm hoping that we get a few others to jump in here with us. If not, that is okay. I've got the movie on this computer, or so Whitewater has told me, and I've come to trust that guy.
So Kristen Bell, is he playing Joseph? I mean, they just had him there with the woman who I assume is playing Mary. But I thought the ex Batman was an interesting choice.
Christian Bale isn't in this, is he?
That's I think that's what the thing that we looked at that we clicked on said. Christian Bale. Yep.
Oh, how about that? Well, I know that Anthony Hopkins is in it. That's interesting. I didn't see Christian Bale, but I do know that there were some, oh, as there always are, I suppose, controversial ideas about the casting of this movie. And for most of the parts, Joseph is played by Ito Tako.
Okay.
I have a hard time saying that name without laughing, but it's not his fault. So Ito Tako is Joseph, Noah Cohen as Mary, Stephanie Noor as Salome, and they're all Israeli, which makes sense. I mean, Nazareth, Galilee, those are in Israel still today. Some had hoped for Palestinian actors. I don't know, but I can't wait to see what part Christian Bale plays.
Yes, at some point we have somebody playing Jesus.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. And it's been long enough since I've seen this that I don't. I'm trying to remember if we see Jesus all grown up. I think that we do, And I'm wondering, yeah, who might that be? Yeah, so let me make sure I know where this movie is on this actual
Yeah,
computer.
because it's like Pernilla,
Yeah, so,
August.
yeah. I don't know. Could be confused or something.
That water could just pick that picture up. And it's not really big. It's broken.
Possibly.
Oh my goodness, hold up. Yes, no. All right, well, I know how to find it. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Go ahead.
It's 8 minutes after. I mean, come on, we're not getting any younger here. So, how to approach the person of Mary is, of course, a very fascinating question, just all on its own. We could have a whole session just about how do we approach that as Lutherans, or as Christians in general, across the Christian world. There are very many unique ways to approach Mary, as far as what do we believe about her, what do we say about her, and so whatever it is that we see in the film, I think we need to remember that there has been as much cultural significance added to her as they could ever fit into a movie. So, and I'm thinking, for example, in Mexico, the Virgin of Guadalupe, and throughout the Latin world, the Spanish speaking and Portuguese speaking world, there are dozens of different iconic Virgin Mary revealings that have taken place and different ways that people revere and honor the Virgin Mary, very specific to their context. If you ask me, it's one of the things that the Catholic Church got right throughout the centuries. That Catholicism can be integrated into the life, community, and culture of the people that it met around the world. So Mexico, Central and South America are just one example, but it's a good one because reverence of Mary is very serious. It's a huge part of the faith south of our border, and it's very beautiful. It's expressed beautifully. It's felt beautifully from the things that I've read and seen and heard about it. And I wouldn't discount any of that. That people feel this divine connection with the Virgin Mary. You probably already know, but since the beginning of this movement, there have been debates about the nature of Mary, and we can see in Scripture, we can track down like where Scripture meets her, but especially the end of her life and then after her life, the things that were believed about her, again, they just vary really widely. And so I'm going to show a couple things here, a couple of pictures, and ask you to forgive me for my technical shortfalls, but I'm going to just try to share my screen and hopefully it'll work. All right, are you seeing a picture of kind of a cave-looking sanctuary?
Yeah, with the icon in the middle.
Yeah, very good. Does anybody know what this is? This isn't a gotcha. I just don't want to assume to tell you things that you already know.
Is that Bethlehem?
It is Bethlehem. Very good. What told you that it might be Bethlehem?
Well, it has Mary and the Christ child, and I think I've seen this thing before. I vague.
Ah.
I think Helen, did you go there?
Well, I was in Bethlehem, but I don't remember seeing that particular cave.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I may have. Just the fact that I don't remember it doesn't mean that I wasn't there.
Sure, sure. Yeah, so unlike the shepherds' caves, which are outside of Bethlehem, where I think the best imagination would think about Jesus being born in a cave like that, this is right in the streets of Bethlehem. And as you're walking toward Nativity Lutheran Church in Bethlehem, you will see to one side this whole big kind of golden gate and the facade of a chapel or a church. And it is noticeable that the stone of this church and the stones around it are lighter colored than, but if there wasn't a church there, you might not notice it, but it is. And you can tell also that this is the Holy Land or somewhere really old, because in order to get to the actual grotto, the actual chapel space, you have to go down 2 big flights of stairs. But this is what they call the Milk Grotto in Bethlehem. I've definitely been there and seen it, and it's the kind of thing where you have to like almost do a double take, because the traditional story goes, this is not a biblical story, but the traditional story goes that shortly after Jesus was born, the Holy Family made their way into Bethlehem proper to get some things that they needed or whatever, and that the Virgin Mary was nursing Jesus, and some of her breast milk fell onto the stones in the street there, and that it lightened up the color of the stones. Excuse me. Now, people from all over the world, particularly those Orthodox and some Catholic, will travel to this place, especially if they're having maybe some trouble conceiving, or maybe they've just conceived and found out, and it's a place of blessing for pregnancy. Because as the traditional story goes, the breast milk of Mary fell here, and it made this, again, it turned the color of the stone, and it made this whole place a holy sanctuary that automatically blesses people for pregnancy. And so the Milk Grotto is, I think, a really good encapsulation of some of the either legend or tradition. We maybe could even say mythology. I mean, I don't know that this isn't true, and I don't judge people who find power in that, especially those who might need a comfort during a difficult time. But again, the ethos around Mary is really strong. And so that even drops of her breast milk, where they fell on the stone, will create for almost 2,000 years a pilgrimage site for those who need a blessing for pregnancy. And what we have in the middle here is it is an icon. It's very unique though. It is Mary breastfeeding the infant Jesus. I don't know of any others. I'm sure they exist, but this is certainly the most famous. And so it also kind of puts us in touch with like that kind of tradition is a lot, but it also is true to scripture. I mean, this is a person who received the message from the angel, who said yes to God's will for her life, who carried the Messiah in her womb and bore the Messiah from her womb. And so she's clearly extraordinary. But again, the stories and the ideas around Mary can kind of seem like a lot. I'm going to minimize for a second and see if I can pull this other picture up. Are there any other comments about the milk grotto?
It kind of emphasizes again the humanity of Jesus, that he was, if he was God, he wouldn't need to be breastfed, right?
Ah, yeah,
And
yeah,
so it just kind of emphasizes that.
And the humanity of Mary.
And the humanity of Mary, yes.
absolutely, absolutely. Which is really stunning because, I mean, if you ask me, we make our boldest claims around Advent and Christmas when God fully enters the human story. I mean, it wasn't based on some previous story or something. This was a brand new thing. And, we think back through The Chosen, no wonder people had kind of a hard time just figuring out, could this really be true? That it's this guy, it's this man? And then Mary, his mother, was with him for much of his ministry. And so again, trying to figure out, well, she clearly had access to the divine. She clearly was not just an ordinary person. She was extraordinary in many ways. And I love that it emphasizes the humanity of, I mean, a baby being breastfed is such a human experience. Yeah, and it's not something that gods do. In the case of the milk grotto, at the time, especially, this is a 5th or 6th century shrine. And at the time, there were plenty of other options on the table. If you wanted to pray to the fertility goddesses or what have you, there were plenty around. The Egyptians had their own, the Greeks, the Romans each had their own, and on and on. But people connected to God through Mary in that very human way. And it's really powerful. It really is. But the mythos around Mary just kind of grows and grows. I kind of wish I had done this in the other order, but here is one of the most famous carvings in the world. Does anybody know what this is?
It's
When you did the art thing, maybe
Yeah.
two years ago, this was one of the sculptures that we did, and at the time, also I remember is I think is that is it in Rome or in Florence?
It's the very first thing you see when you walk into.
The Peter.
Mhm.
There's a replica of this in the Bible Museum in Washington, D.C.
Oh, how interesting. Hmm.
It may not be full size, but it's a copy of this sculpture.
Oh, interesting.
It's
Yeah.
called, I think it's called the Pietà, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, excellent. And I call it a Pieta. I mean, art historians will call it a Pieta or the Pieta by Michelangelo. It's from the late 1400s, and it's just exquisite work in marble, just from a artistic point of view. But also on the field. Go ahead.
Absolutely stunning. And
It is.
it just to think that a solid material can look so human is, I mean, skin and bone and all that kind of stuff is just, it just amazed me when I saw it. And it does till now. And this doesn't do justice for what, when you get to see it in person, is, but the draping of cloth in a, in a hard stone surface, it's just, you just wonder how long it took somebody to do that.
I know. Yeah, yeah. And Michelangelo is famous for saying he would look at a slab of marble and he would see the statue already in it. And so he just had to clear away the rubble. And so, yeah, we have this, we have David, which is in Milan and, or Florence, maybe Florence. But yeah, so this stands out as one of the more famous sculptures, and for good reason. It's beautiful.
But you know what interested me is that it portrays Jesus as such a diminutive person.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's
Mhm.
so large.
Ah, yeah, yeah, very interesting. So within this piece of art, Michelangelo really makes a lot of statements about, especially Mary. And in fact, I don't want to overstate it, but when we view Jesus from all angles in this statue, there's not a lot that we wouldn't expect. We can see what the scene is. It's Jesus's dead body after the crucifixion with nail holes in the hands and feet and everything, draped across his mother's lap like that, and she's holding him so tender. I mean, just you look at her face. She is, it might as well be made of porcelain. I mean, it is so reposed and just beautiful. So a few things about this. I, I don't have a picture of the entire thing. Mostly we want to focus in, but if you see the whole thing, it doesn't take long to realize that Mary's lap in this sculpture is really big. So that Jesus fits on it, and it looks like another Jesus might sort of fit right next to him. Her lap is so the way that she receives him and holds him like she did when he was a baby. And then, just her dimensions. If she was going to stand up, she would be like 12 feet tall, because her legs, just that landing spot for Jesus' body is so big and so safe. The way that she holds her left hand, it's almost like she's offering up his dead body for the world. And she doesn't show emotion so much as she just shows pure love in her face. But I would also have you take a look at her right hand, and it is grasping the body of Jesus under his right armpit. And do you notice anything interesting about her hand there?
It's a big hand.
It's big. It is big. Both of her hands are really big, but especially that right one. What else?
She's not touching exactly his body. She's touching
Ah,
a piece of fabric between his body and her hand.
yeah, yep. So again, the ethos around Mary, and this is 15th century, is so carefully guarded. It so carefully guards her purity that Michelangelo would never, it's like he would never dare show her touching dead flesh. And in order to keep her completely pure and uncorrupted as the Virgin, she's shown here, she doesn't touch his skin anywhere. And on that right hand side, where it seems like it would be natural, there's a fold of her cloak that comes up and keeps her fingers from touching his dead body. Now, if this were strictly realist, it doesn't matter. Of course, she would just, if it was being handed to her, this is not a biblical scene. As far as we know, Mary never saw the dead body of Jesus, but except on the cross. But the theological statement is huge, and it's about Mary. Jesus died. This part, hopefully, we're familiar with, but he really says so much more about Mary. Look at her. Look at her face again. She hasn't aged. She looks younger than him. And then she holds him with fabric in between her perfect fingers and his dead and therefore corrupted flesh. And so, I'm always interested in art, but this is a really good example of, and Barbara was right. You walk in St. Peter's Basilica, boom, this is right there in the first, I forget what they're called, little mini.
Like an alcove or something.
Yeah, there's an even fancier word, but yeah, it's right there, and it's behind like foot thick bulletproof glass because some deranged person smashed it up with a hammer at one point. But yeah, this really is a theological testament to the ideas and beliefs around Mary in the church. Now, on an individual basis, I'm sure we all have a different way of approaching Mary, but in the church, this continued to be the thought about Mary. She's perfect, she's uncorrupted, and she's still young. Like even the years can't do her any harm. Here's this one. All right, and now hopefully we're seeing a tomb. Well, sort of like a tomb. Are we seeing that?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, good deal. Does anybody know what this one is?
Did it be before she was assumed into heaven?
Excellent use of correct verbiage, Helen. Assumed into heaven.
I studied her a lot about 30 years ago.
Oh, wonderful. Good. Well, you have a lot to share with us.
I
I'm
had
sure.
a Catholic friend who fed me a lot of books about her.
Okay, gotcha. And they're all good, I'm sure. And the thoughts about Mary as they developed, and then with the Reformation, I mean, I think it's really fascinating. So, when you say assumed or assumption, can you say a little bit more about that? What does that mean?
Well, according to the Catholic books that I read, she was about 70 years old. And after the crucifixion and resurrection, John did take her and lived with her and took care of her. But when it was time for her to go to heaven, she gave herself a bath and laid herself out. And angels came and removed the tiles of the ceiling of the room she was in and lifted her up and carried her to heaven without actually a physical death.
Certainly could not have said it better myself. Yeah, that's it. And so this is, and again, this is deep, deep underground. It's in what's called the Dormition Church in Jerusalem. It's a really beautiful church building. It's quite a modern church building, what's on ground level today, but as with anything around old places like the Holy Land, you go in and you go down and you you wind up in this much, much older, smaller chapel of Dormition. And Dormition meaning sleep, because in the stories about Mary, you're absolutely right. She didn't die. Some would say went into a coma maybe, or fell asleep, and then angels carried her into heaven. That she didn't ever actually die, and that she's on the day of the resurrection of the dead, she'll be kind of first in line, and that she's like alive in heaven. So again, whatever you might think about that personally, we do recognize that these traditions about Mary, and I think it's okay to say legends too, some of the legends about Mary are really powerful and over the top in a good way, because we all do need to wonder, with what we find out from scripture, how do we categorize Mary? And we find that in the foundational documents of the Reformation, because the Luther and the early reformers were very clear about praying to saints. And so there's even you can check out the Augsburg Confession and the Apology for yourself, but there's a list of things that basically you shall not do with saints. One of them is have icons. Your church, at least your worship space, ought not to have representations of the saints in it. Jesus, the symbols of the Trinity, things like that, all okay. But where they seem to really be caught not knowing what to do is with Mary. Because in the religious upbringing of even Luther and the early reformers, there was kind of a saint for everything. And so when the time came and you needed a certain thing, or you wanted to pray in a certain way, you would address a saint, and they were like intermediaries between you and God. And the reformers were clear that we don't need intermediaries between us and God. But then you get to the section about Mariology, what they call, the study of Mary, or thinking about Mary. And it's actually a little bit awkward. They basically wind up saying, don't have icons of the saints, don't pray to the saints, etc., etc. Don't pray to Mary unless you want to, because it's okay, and we're not really sure what to do with her. Because clearly she's extraordinary.
An example of what you're saying is the Rosary, which is a very common Catholic prayer. Hail Mary, Mother of God, blessed are you among women. And I used to could be able to say the whole thing, but I don't right now. And it's just a calling on her in a prayer-like way to help you.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And there's something comforting, and it's comforting in the person of Jesus too, but there's something comforting about an otherwise ordinary person who is approached by God with a plan, who says yes to God, who undergoes great personal suffering in order to bring this plan to fruition, who intimately knows the Messiah and has this really sacred connection with Jesus that nobody else will ever have. And so yeah, I think we still struggle a little bit about, like in the Lutheran Church, we're not going to say a prayer to Mary and say like, "Oh Mary, we know you're listening." But there is something about me that wants to believe that Mary is listening, because that human connection that we mentioned earlier is so profound. And so many people around the world have had experiences where it's Mary that brought them the comfort, the strength, the resilience, whatever they needed. And I don't discount that.
We had the privilege of going to Medjugorje in Serbia, Bosnia,
Mm.
and some children saw an apparition of Mary, and she kept coming to these children, and they built this church for people to come and worship. And when we were there, it was pouring down rain all day until we put our feet on the bottom of the hill. It was Apparition Hill, and the rain immediately stopped. We went to the top of the hill, and there's this life-size crucifix. And I stood there and prayed to Jesus and felt very close to him. Then we went down the hill, and the rain immediately started again.
Oh,
I
wow.
thought that was a miraculous gift to us. And it was raining so hard, a tree fell from a hill onto the road and blocked the road right after we passed that spot in the road. So there were, and just the fact that I got there was amazing, because I wanted to go, and there was supposed to have been a tour, and the tour was canceled, and I was not going to let that stop me. I've crossed halfway around the world to go to this place I'm going. And so we found a taxi driver that we paid him for a full day of his time, and a private tour guide. We paid her for a full day of her time. And she talked the whole day, telling us all about the place. And, it was just a day I'll never forget.
That sounds pretty miraculous. That's awesome. So the clouds literally stopped the rain so that you could have that experience.
Our shoes were so covered in mud, we had to get newspaper from a vendor to use the newspaper to clear our mud off before we could go in the church where people sit to pray to her. But
Oh,
and during World War II, when the Germans came to attack the town, the villagers formed a human chain, hand to hand, across the road, and the tanks would not cross and go into the village. It's
wow.
one of the few villages during World War II that was not destroyed.
How interesting. Wow. And that's in Serbia?
It's in
Medjugorje.
it's actually in Herzegovina,
Ah, yeah, okay. Mm-hmm.
right next to Serbia. I had a conference in Dubrovnik, Croatia, and
Oh, cool.
which was close to, it was about a 2 or 3 hour drive from Dubrovnik to Medjugorje.
So I told him I'd go to the conference and he'd get me to Medjugorje, and he did. It was quite a day.
That is quite a day. Hey, when you're in that neighborhood, make the
That's
most
right.
of it. Yeah.
You
Mhm.
just don't. I just would not get that close and miss it.
No, good for you. Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. Speaking of the Holy Land, the Serbian church is a very ancient church, an an orthodoxy all their own, and they own a good bit of the old city of Jerusalem, and some of the most amazing edifices in the city are found in that Serbian quarter. Anyway, I know that the Christian faith has deep, deep, deep roots in that part of the world, and back to the very beginning, really. So thank you so much for sharing that. I don't want to take all of our time. Oh, we welcome in Christine Hammaker. Hello. But I do think it's worthwhile for us to think about what are our attitudes toward Mary. In the Lutheran Church, we have doctrine that talks about Mary. She's an extraordinary woman, clearly of all the saints. The Reformers considered the saints to be of value as an example to us of holy living, and best among them is Mary, the mother of Jesus. We're going to have some time beforehand next week. You'll have some time with Eric. I'll be away at camp with Vicar Natalie, but then the following week we'll have some time too as we finish up the movie. And so maybe a brief overview of Mary in the scriptures. And if you've got a Bible handy, I would open up to Matthew chapter 1. I don't know if it's worth mentioning, but Mary is not brought up in the Old Testament. She makes her debut. If we want to get technical, in the way that in the order that the Gospels were written, she makes her debut in Mark. And it's not, just like everything in Mark, it's very abbreviated and there's not a lot of detail there. The most detail that we get comes from the book of Matthew. And that's even compared to the Gospel of Luke, who spends a great deal of time telling us about the birth, the Annunciation and the birth. The Gospel of Matthew does something really special, though. So if you're at Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, you can see, and this is the reason, by the way, that the Gospel of Matthew is first in the New Testament. It's the first book of the New Testament because of this genealogy. And if I could just ask one of you, maybe Christine Hammaker, if you wouldn't mind reading Matthew 1 through 16.
Christine, you're muted.
And I'm just joking. Before
Okay.
before you dive in, any good lector at church will take a look at this reading and go, "Oh no, I'm going to be sick that day," because
Of the towns or
just
The
names?
names,
yeah,
That's okay.
it's name after name after name, and we don't actually have to do it. I'm just joking around, but it's worthwhile taking a look, because as we look through this list of the genealogy of Jesus, we find a lot of really important names that we know. Obviously, obviously the Gospel of Matthew starts with Abraham and Isaac that we know, and Jacob, of course, and then Judah. But then from there, we also hear about Perez. There's quite a bit in the Old Testament about Perez. We also hear Boaz, who takes a a leading role in certain stories, a really important story. Jesse, and then David. So Matthew is going to great length to show us that Jesus comes through the pure genealogy of Abraham. He is truly 100% from the family of Abraham. But then also David, who was really the father of kings. And so the names that follow his, if we're familiar with the Old Testament at all, are names that we know. Of course, Rehoboam, that kind of ruined the whole thing. But then later Hezekiah, Manasseh, Amos, Josiah, etc., etc. But what Matthew's doing is showing us how directly linked Jesus is to King David and all the way back to Abraham. But you will notice in verse 16, Jacob, the father of Joseph. In verse 16, it does an interesting thing. It doesn't take the time to mention a lot of women. It does mention Ruth and maybe a few others, but Mary kind of gets introduced here, and
Is Tamar,
that's important. I'm sorry, did I miss something?
is Tamar listed? Pete has the Bible.
I don't think so.
Maybe in Luke, Tamar's listed.
Yeah, Tamar is in
At
there.
the very
Yes, it is.
beginning.
It is, right, it is. At
Yeah,
the, early on, yeah.
verse 3. Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah, very good. So that's kind of the first that we hear about Mary in the New Testament, as we read through the Bible. And then we have kind of a shortened birth narrative. Mary certainly takes some stage here, but most would argue that Matthew focuses a little bit more on Joseph, who also has a dream, just like his namesake was big time into dreams. And then, of course, in chapter 2, we hear about the visit of the wise men who hear that the Messiah has been born, and they come to pay him homage, and they find Mary, Joseph, and Jesus in the house where they were staying. And wherever that might be, we're not sure. Verse 13 is very interesting. The Holy Family being refugees into Egypt and then back again. And throughout the gospel, we just hear a little more about Mary in the Gospel of Matthew. Obviously, Luke also really focuses on her. We have just about the whole first chapter that is very Mary-centric in the Gospel of Luke. We hear about her along the way, just like we do in Matthew, a little bit less so. Same thing with the Gospel of John, as far as hearing about her a bit along the way. There is a scene in John that doesn't exist anywhere else where Mary is at the foot of the cross and Jesus brings the beloved disciple over and says, "This is your mother, this is your son," and they become family. So that's very powerful. But as far as the resurrection stories, we don't hear about Mary. And the only time we hear about Mary after the Gospels is in the first chapter of Acts, which was also written by Luke, who just sort of mentions her as being part of the group who are sort of wondering what to do and witnessing the ascension of Jesus. Paul doesn't talk about Mary. The other letters in the New Testament don't talk about Mary. The one kind of offbeat cryptic thing that Paul says is Jesus was born of a woman, but doesn't mention Mary by name. And then in the Revelation, we have this interesting scene where this beautiful woman adorned with the sun is part of the imagery in sort of the second half of that book. And most assume that that is talking about Mary, especially with some of the dialogue about her not having died, but still being alive, that kind of thing. And yeah, so the most that we can hope for as far as scriptures is really the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew and the beginning of the Gospel of Luke. I think I said it the wrong way earlier, but Luke has more to say about Mary early on than anybody else. We have not a lot of the background of Mary, but we do hear about the Annunciation. We hear her sing a song that is very famous and something that we usually sing around the time of Advent, but can be sung anytime, the Magnificat. And then, yeah, and then the birth narrative that we're very familiar with. So, as far as actual background biographical information about Mary, the Bible isn't all that interested in that. The canonized scriptures just don't really feel the need too much to dig into her past. But when you're making a movie about Mary, you better have something to say about her past. Now, we need to know going into this movie that I mentioned earlier that there are non-canonical books, things like the Gospel according to James. There is a Gospel according to Mary, the mother of Jesus. And from what I can tell, this movie takes some of those extra biblical sources as source material for the background of Mary, because those extra biblical sources do dig into the background of Mary. It's probably worthwhile to note that things like the Gospel according to James are 2nd or 3rd century writings. They're mystical writings. They're Gnostic writings, if you're familiar with that term. And so they, so they're not scriptural, but they do have something to say about like Mary's background. So for example, nowhere in scripture are we going to find a scene of the Virgin Mary in the same room as Herod. Nowhere in the scriptures are we going to hear anything about Mary's childhood. Or how did she and Joseph meet? Or, things like that. But when you're making a movie, I suppose it's good to have some idea. I do have a quote here from the director of this movie, DJ Caruso, who said, "We really wanted to portray Mary in the most human and relatable way possible." Which makes sense. That makes for better TV. It might not be biblically true, but hopefully we can find some flashes of what we've seen in The Chosen, where it's a faithful interpretation of what might have been, to kind of fill in some of those gaps.
I did a little real quick Googling of Mary, movies of Mary, and the one with Taco and Hopkins is from 24, and this one is from 99.
Oh, yeah, okay. So we are watching the one from 2024?
Yeah, we're watching the one with Bill, at least the one with the picture, Mary, Mother of Jesus, being the title, not just straight Mary. If that's the one we're watching that Whitewater gave us the picture of with Christian Bale in it, that's from 99.
Okay, well, I apologize for any mix-ups. I have every intention of watching the 2024 movie about Mary. That's a Netflix
That's what it was
production.
sounding like. So I just wanted, before it started, to let you know.
I gotcha. Okay.
Just for that one.
I'm pretty sure this is the 2024 Netflix movie
Yeah.
titled Mary.
Yes.
And whatever, Whitewater, you give him an inch and he just walks all over you. I'm not sure exactly what the image was that he sent out, but this is why I was confused about Christian Bale. I'm like,
He's definitely not in the 24 one.
I
And
don't think.
Hopkins definitely isn't in the 99 one.
Well, it depends. He might have just put put a different picture on.
It could be.
That's exactly what I think. He just found a picture and.
Right,
pasted it
stuck in there.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that that's what happened. So, y'all are seasoned now at watching The Chosen and interpreting cinematic storytelling and parsing that with scriptural truth and traditional truth and things like that. I guess the main point that I'm trying to drive home before we start is people are all over the map on who Mary was, who she still is, her role in this whole story, how significant that is. But mostly we agree that she's extraordinary. And so, we'll want to give some leeway to whatever they choose to show. But then also we can have some good constructive conversation about, is that helpful? So keep your eyes out for things like family systems. Try to keep in mind first century family systems were, I don't know if they were more complicated than they are now, but the nuclear unit of man, woman, baby was a little harder to come by. Yeah, so we'll just see. So keep your eyes out for stuff like that. Are there any other things to mention before we begin? Yeah, it looked like Zoom had kicked everybody off for a minute. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, well, I suppose that's probably as good a place as any to take a break and reflect on what we've seen. So go ahead. I'm gonna get the light turned on here, and I'll get the camera back on here. What did you notice about this first, let's say, couple chapters of the movie?
Well,
How influential Gabriel was.
and the Lucifer showing up to try to tempt Mary into the pleasures of the world.
Yeah, that was kind of gross.
But
Um,
her mother and father were appeared to be devout Jews. They were praying for a child.
They were apparently very wealthy, it appeared. That they were well-to-do. They had a large house, had servants, had an olive grove.
Yeah.
yeah, I noticed that too. And so to be childless would really be a sticking point for the otherwise outwardly blessed. And so a child to carry on their inheritance and their name would be truly a gift. Yeah.
And that appeared to be their depiction of the Immaculate Conception, where Mary was born miraculously, just like Jesus was.
Ah. Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
really that. I don't remember ever hearing that.
Well, that's a Catholic thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that would fall into that category of, we don't know. And with Mariology the way that it is, all kinds of stories make their way in. And I'm trying to think if that's part of the gospel according to James. But yeah, not scriptural about a miraculous. Now, we do hear about Jesus's cousin, Mary's sister Elizabeth, having John in a miraculous way, with actually very similar annunciations and miraculous things happening. Zechariah is mute because he doesn't believe what the angel has told him, et cetera, et cetera. But this kind of background to Mary is filled in. Yeah, so how about Herod?
Boy,
He's a bad dude.
Crazy from the get-go.
yeah, crazy like a fox.
I just had images, nothing political, but he said, Herod rules by fear. I'm like, oh, yeah, yeah, here we go again. Another one.
So true. Yeah. And yeah, all he needs is a military parade. What? Anyway, the truth about Herod is just about stranger than we could ever imagine. The I did a study, I don't know if y'all remember, but this was shortly after I got here, about Herod and about his family and the things that he built. I mean, he was certainly a visionary in some ways. He built,
Caesarea, right? You talked about that in honor of Caesar, the city.
yeah, Caesarea Maritima, which is really more of a cultural capital than we would remember from scripture. It doesn't really come up in the scriptures. It's not Caesarea Philippi. This is Caesarea Maritima. And Herodium, this gigantic castle, Masada, which if anybody's been to the Holy Land, maybe you had a chance to look at Masada out in the desert, this giant plateaued fortress. Yeah, so brilliant in some ways. We also talked at that time about his background and how his father and really his grandfather had relationships in Rome. And so he was born as a Roman citizen, but also technically a Jew, even though his ancestry was from Edom. And this kind of natural rise to power that he had. And when it comes right down to it, in the war between the Romans and the Parthians, and some of the interplay that wound up getting Caesar Augustus the role of emperor, he made a couple of key decisions that put him in line for big favors from Caesar Augustus. So yeah, he's got fairly absolute authority, at least locally, and he's completely insane. It is absolutely true that he had his own children, many of his own children, his own siblings, people that he knew, guards and generals in his army, all murdered because he was so paranoid about his reign. I mean, that stuff is all true. The only thing, the piece of it that we get in scripture is the massacre of the innocents that happens in the Gospel of Matthew. But that is truly a larger than life character. And, who else but Anthony Hopkins? I,
Doesn't he die in 3 AD when his bowels just fall out?
yeah, the nature of his death, I don't recall. I trust you on that. I had in mind the date of 6 AD, sorry, 6 BC.
Yeah, I thought he died when Jesus' parents got word that they could leave Egypt and go back to Nazareth was because they heard Herod had died.
Yeah, Herod had died. Yeah, so we have to balance a little bit some of the historical texts and then what the scriptural texts say. But he died. Yeah, he died very early. Some argue historically that his death was earlier than had been previously thought, and so it pushed the timeline for Jesus' birth back earlier than the year 1. But that whole calendar was developed in the 6th century, and they didn't have the kind of resources that we do. But anyway, just yeah, very larger than life, very scary kind of a character, and well portrayed in his madness, I think, here. What we don't know is about Mary's service in the temple, unless I'm saying something wrong here, and coming face to face with Herod. That's
That may be theatrical, but the research I did on Mary did indicate that her parents took her to the temple and they raised her and educated her. So when she had Jesus, she could teach him.
hmm,
She homeschooled him because she had been trained in the temple.
how interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I think it lines up. Um, so that would be one of those shades of truth where it makes sense. There's no reason to like doubt that. It doesn't say so in the scripture, but while we're in the mode of imagining some parts of the story needing to be filled in, that makes sense to me. What about Joseph? What do you make of Joseph?
I like the way they introduced him as a poor boy, dressed in sort of rags and working with the workers and just a good old boy.
Just a good old boy. Yeah. Yeah, and there are some rumors flying around in the places where he is working as a carpenter about a rebellion against Herod, which was, I think, historically true. We don't hear about it in scripture, but yeah, people didn't like Herod for obvious reasons. He was a megalomaniac, full of lust for his own power. I think that's all true, and I'm sure that there was talk of uprising, although he quashed any sign of dissent that he could from the top down. I'm a little surprised that Joseph looks so young. Most of the scholarship that I've come in contact with would place him as being quite a bit older than Mary.
Oh.
Again, we don't know.
That would be consistent with their culture,
Yeah,
got well established in their trade and been able to support a wife before they got a wife.
right. Yeah. Because at some point he needs to approach the family and say, "I'd like to get married to your daughter." Unfortunately, first century, she didn't have much say in the matter. We can think of it almost as more of a business transaction. But the guy the Joseph that we see in the movie so far doesn't seem to be in a position to do that. I don't know whether they'll get together in the next scene or later at some point, but she wouldn't have been much older than she is now in the movie when she became pregnant with Jesus. There's also just some biblical scholarship around Joseph. He after the birth narratives and the things immediately following it, he really falls off the map. I'm thinking about a scene in the middle of Matthew's gospel, and it's told again in Luke's gospel about Jesus having siblings, and people say, "Isn't this Mary's son?" Which is a very odd thing to say. Either Joseph wasn't around, or there was some understanding that he wasn't really Jesus's father, which would be very scandalous. And so for them to be out in public with that would be scandalous and kind of dangerous. And then again, he's just not mentioned again. So, and this is purely supposing, but I suppose that Joseph probably died somewhere along the way.
Mhm.
and he's remembered as Saint Joseph, the caretaker of Jesus, and certainly said his own yeses to God's plan, but isn't found outside of those birth narratives and the stuff right after. So I don't know. But again, it wouldn't make a very good 21st century movie for some, 50-year-old guy to be getting married to a teenager. That just doesn't sit right, with good reason. But I think that we can assume in the first century that he was older and more established than her.
And in where she is right now, she's still with the temple. So she'd have to go back. She'd have to go back to Nazareth at some point.
But she was in Nazareth when the angel appeared to her.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And then just to circle back around, the angel Gabriel doesn't just show up to talk to Elizabeth and Zechariah, not just to announce the birth of Jesus with Mary and Joseph, but is kind of stationed along the way to help guide Mary toward her destiny as the mother of Jesus. So that's interesting. Again, non-biblical, but
And they showed that Lucifer and Gabriel were brothers. He called them brother.
oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, and for some reason when
Lucifer called Gabriel brother.
I didn't catch that.
I
Oh,
didn't-
brother, don't go, you go slow. Yeah.
I did not really catch that either. I suppose they mean him to be saying that they are actual brothers. Yeah, that's interesting.
You had the Cain and Abel thing, so they could have a.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, sibling rivalry is alive and well in scripture, for sure. Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his brothers, and many, many others. But yeah, so for Lucifer, whose name comes up in scripture, it's not this character necessarily, but to be, and then again, mostly it's tradition stories about Lucifer. We do have like hints along the way about like the morning star that fell from heaven, and then that's brought up. That imagery is used again in Revelation. I think it's still a bit of a stretch to say that Lucifer is the fallen angel of, unless it says that, and it's just not coming to my mind. But the character of Lucifer has certainly grown in complexity over the generations. But yeah, to my recollection, we don't specifically hear that Lucifer is a fallen angel who is Satan, the kind of direct line that we would draw. But I could be wrong. I'll have to look it up after this. But
C.S. Lewis did in his some of his Perelandra and the trilogies he did. He kind of added mythology to who Lucifer was.
that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. And very brilliantly did that. I'm thinking of the Screw Tape Letters too, which is the demon, but
Tommy taught that to the high school Sunday school kids at Grace.
oh, cool. The Screw Tape Letters.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
neat. Yeah.
15, 20 years ago.
At least.
Oh, cool. So, I'm gonna need to wrap up and run over to choir, but are there any other thoughts about what we've seen here, or things we need to remember for next time?
I thought theatrically it was done, pretty good. It kept my attention, just like The Chosen did. And so I'm pleased with the production.
I would agree with that. Yeah. Yeah, of course, I'm a little nitpicky about their landscape of Jerusalem. Whatever.
But you've been there, I haven't, so.
Yeah, and ultimately to the content of the movie and the story it's trying to tell, it really doesn't matter. But I do see a little bit of inconsistency there. But yeah, great production quality. I like the actors that they've chosen, and I'm quite intrigued to look ahead. Remember, next week I'll be away at camp with Vicar Natalie, but Eric will lead the session, and but I'll be sure to watch that before we gather again the following week and finish up with this movie.
And I think it showed how loving Mary was, how she started a bread distribution to the poor.
Ah, yeah.
And then not only her, but her fellow students all contributed to it at the end. And then she took care of the high priest after he was injured by Herod.
Yeah.
So
The female that received her when her parents first brought her, what was she called? The
Anna, prophetess.
prophetess, right? Was that somewhat? Is that historical? The prophetess and in this group of red dressed virgins.
Not that I know of, no. And Old Testament, the canonized Old Testament stops early enough that it's really impossible to get a real solid understanding of what temple life was like. I mean, Ezra and Nehemiah is just about the end of the line for Old Testament timeline. And that's when that second temple is rebuilt. And we hear, there's only there's a couple of minor prophets that prophesied during that time about the wickedness of the servants and even of the temple itself, honestly. And I don't think scripturally we get a good enough view to know whether this is accurate or not. But I do know that there were prophetesses. I mean, there certainly were women prophets who were highly regarded, even in a very patriarchal system. There were, looking back, like the Hannah and others, women who had the gift of prophecy and would have had some standing in the court and in the temple. So
I wondered about when Jesus' parents took the baby Jesus to the temple to be baptized, and the old man Simeon recognized him, and there was a lady that had been in the temple for like 60 years, and I'm thinking her name was Anna.
It was.
Anna. Mm-hmm.
I wondered if that could have been the same person.
I think they want you to think that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I kind of forgot about her role as prophet, but yeah, she and Simeon recognize something in Jesus that not everybody does. And yeah, that's a very interesting point. Yeah, cool. Well, certainly plenty of reason to tune in next time. And so again, Eric will be leading it. I'm not certain whether he'll be leading that from home or not, but if you're comfortable on Zoom, go ahead and zoom on in, and you can look at the center section of the movie, talk about it, and then we'll finish up the next week, okay?
Sounds good.